He cannot be supremely merciful. He cannot be supreme creator, as we see evil in this world. So everyone, they clap, wonderful refutation. Wow, our professor is genius. Then he had another student get up and he asked that, okay, so now, have you seen God? First he asked, do you believe now in God? So he said, after hearing all this, what would he say? He said, sometimes. Sometimes I believe. So he asked, you believe in God and you say sometimes you believe in God, but I am your science professor. I have always taught you to believe in things which we experiment, which we can see, which we can perceive through our senses. Have you seen your God with your eyes? He said no. Have you touched your God? Have you smelt your God? Have you heard your God? Have you had any sensory perception of your God? He said no. So which means, according to the testable protocol of the fundamentals of science and logic, we come to the conclusion that this God should not exist because you cannot perceive this God with any of your given senses. Wow. Everyone was spellbound. Then there was one student who got up and he said, my dear professor, can I address the class? Now the professor was very much, enlivened. Yes, someone has dared to come up and challenge me. So he said, yes, what do you have to say? So this student, he said, I would first want to take your first argument. And you said that if evil exists, how can God be supremely merciful and how can He be the supreme creator? I asked you a question, my dear professor, scientific professor. My question is there anything called darkness in this world? So he said, yes. What is night if there is no darkness? He said, no, you're wrong, because according to science, there is nothing called darkness. You cannot measure darkness. You cannot give me a jar of dark, darker, darkest. But you can measure heat and light. Heat and light can be measured, but darkness cannot be measured. And what is darkness then? Darkness is nothing but absence of light. So what is evil? Evil is nothing but absence of divinity. Just like darkness is nothing but absence of light, evil is nothing but absence of divinity. So now, all the students, they started clapping. We also have someone. Yes. Give him some more. So then the professor, he was quite impressed. And then the professor asked, so what about my second argument? And now the student, he said, oh, your second argument, you asked my dear fellow student that, have you had any sensory perception of your God with your eyes, with your skin, with your ears or any other given senses? The professor said, yes. So what do you have to say about that? So the student said, he turned to the classroom and he asked the students, the entire class, he asked, how many of you, my dear students, have you seen the brain of our professor? Have you touched the brain of our professor? Have you smelled? Have you heard? Have you had any sensory perception of the brain of our professor? And everyone unanimously said, none of us. So according to the testable protocol of the fundamentals of science and logic today, we come to the conclusion that our dear professor should not be having any brain. So, when we talk about good and bad, we have to understand that, the example of light and darkness. So over here, Google is not all good, because God, even if God gives miseries, it's for the good of the living entities. And of course, that's another subject matter, but we understand the philosophy in that matter. So, this is the 8th refutation, and the last one. Google can't award you with liberation from birth, old age, disease and death. Might be the reverse. A person might go deeper into the cycle of birth, old age and disease and death and all that. So these are the 9 refutations as against the 9 proofs which they have presented. Now when we talk about transcendental knowledge, Srimad Bhagavatam explains That transcendental knowledge should be having these three qualities. It should be stable, it should be factual, and it should be beneficial. Does that make sense? So if we are basing, practically whoever is a person who is trying to make a livelihood has to have some knowledge. Like even in Bombay, beggars in Bombay, they are well versed where to beg, how to beg, what words to use. If someone like me is given a begging bowl, try. Maybe I won't be able to beg. They have proper knowledge. So even for such a thing like begging, one has to have proper knowledge. But when we are talking about transcendental knowledge, Bhagavatam explains that transcendental knowledge has to be stable, factual, and beneficial. Srila Prabhupada very wonderfully defined transcendental knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita. Reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of others is transcendental knowledge. This is eloquence. Srila Prabhupada ki. Yeah. Reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of others is transcendental knowledge. Is Google doing that? Is it transcendental knowledge which is distinguishing illusion from the reality or reality from illusion for the welfare of others? So therefore, we have to understand that when we talk about God, God has to be understood through transcendental knowledge. Not simply through some data, not simply through some piece of information. It has to be understood through transcendental knowledge which is beyond the three modes. Now what are the gifts of internet? Of course, the gifts might be something which after we see, we'll think again whether we want to have these gifts. Makes one impersonal. Okay, do we have any realizations of how it makes one impersonal? Yes?
For a really long time that maybe we like to get to go outside or you won't be confident in them.
Yeah. We so much deal with machines that we forget the man behind the machine. And we so much get absorbed because these machines inherently they have been designed with the consciousness that you don't need the human touch anymore. The consciousness which has gone behind designing the machines is something like that. So therefore, the more we use, if it is not used in Krishna's service, then yes, definitely the after effects or the side effects is going to rub on. Like a typical example which happened, which I came across, two friends. They decided that they were not spending time with each other because of all these devices which they were using. They were always on chat, they were always on messages and cell phones and like that. So they decided that no, we'll physically meet and we'll physically go on a walk. So these two friends, they decided to physically go on a walk and just spend time with each other, develop their relationship. So they are on a walk and just 10 minutes after they have started their walk, the cell phone rings of one of the friends. So he pulls out the cell phone and somebody hundreds of miles away is calling, "Hey, where are you? How are you? And what's up?"